Hello, welcome to Chasing the Dream. I'm Ethan Chasen, a New York-based organization development coach. I want to introduce you to today's video. You may know if you've watched my other videos on this great organizational cultures playlist that I often take a deep dive into certain organizations who I believe their culture and aspects of their business that impact culture are either doing a phenomenal job or else I shine a light on some of the inherent problems that many organizations face. And I want to spend today talking about an organization that I spent most of my 30 years of my corporate career idolizing, was a company by the name of DuPont. And some things in the news recently caught my attention. And I decided, you know what, now is a really interesting time for me to kind of go back and take a look at DuPont and share some of my observations from my knowledge of them and some things that are in the news most recently. So DuPont recently issued a press release that right now it's in the process of planning to split the venerable DuPont Corporation into three separate publicly traded companies. So their post-split businesses are going to focus on electronics, an electronics company, a water company, and then the DuPont chemicals company. So the new DuPont will remain a premier diversified industrial company with industry-leading brands and solutions, they announced. It reaffirmed DuPont their second quarter 2024 and their full year net sales and also operating EBITDA and adjusted EPS financial guidance. The company just had a call with their investors last week. I'm not an investor, so I don't know what was said, but I wanted to kind of share this with you. Last week, May 22nd, DuPont announced the plan to separate into three distinct publicly traded companies under their split-off plan. DuPont would execute the proposed separations of its electronics and water businesses in a tax-free manner to its shareholders, with new DuPont continuing as a premier diversified industrial company post-successful implementation of the separation. So this is a really big deal. And that's what got me to thinking about DuPont and the history of DuPont and how I have throughout my career, especially the last 15 years as a business growth coach, where I focus on helping organizations build amazing cultures. I've held a spotlight. I've shown a spotlight in DuPont as an organization that has historically, when it comes to its culture and the treatment of its employees, always focused on how they just seemingly always did the right thing. And there are certain companies in heavy industry and pharmaceuticals and chemicals and manufacturing I've kind of gravitated towards. And DuPont, Nucor Steel, those are some of the companies that I really kind of used as examples for my clients. Well, this recent news that DuPont was splitting up got me to think about DuPont over the last decade plus and what it was actually challenged with as a result of one of its massive mergers. So I want to talk a little bit more about the planned split up of DuPont into three separate companies. As a leading standalone company, each of the three businesses is expected to benefit from an ability to tailor capital allocation strategies to pursue different strategic growth objectives amongst the three businesses, enhance strategic flexibility. So the smaller, even a massive organization makes itself, the smaller you are, the more adaptive you can be to external marketplace conditions and opportunities that present themselves. So smaller is more nimble and more flexible. And that was kind of the benefit. Compelling investment profiles appealing to different investor bases. So instead of investing in an aggregate DuPont, you as an investor can look at each of the three core businesses post breakup. The distinct boards of directors and management teams comprised of world-class leaders with track records of driving value creation in each of those three specific industries and sectors. So this is also important. You want people who specialize in an area of expertise in an industry or sector on your leadership team, in senior management roles, as well as on your board. So I'm not going to do any deeper dive into what the ramifications are of DuPont going through this process of splitting up into three companies, other than to say that this triggered something in me. And it triggered me going back to 1981. And that was a seminal year in the history of DuPont. And if you don't know, you don't know. But I'm going to share with you, that was the year that DuPont merged with, acquired a fairly large oil and gas company by the name of Conoco. I'm going to talk about that and the lessons that can be applied in that specific acquisition and what it did to the culture of DuPont. So I want to talk a little bit about change as an element of an organization's history and certainly as a key attribute of its culture. So go back to this New York Times article right after or during, excuse me, the actual merger where DuPont acquired Conoco. And I want to talk a little bit about what that can do, a massive acquisition, and what companies are struggling with still today when it comes to the impact post-merger of the culture that's created of two merged entities. So first, there was DuPont. Then DuPont got into selling gunpowder to the US government. And then the US government's sale of gunpowder led DuPont into the field of chemicals. Chemicals led DuPont to nylon. Nylon business led it to fibers. Fibers gave it the opportunity to diversify. And the diversification led to, drumroll, the acquisition of Conoco in 1981. So listen to this quote back in the day with the chairman of EI DuPont. So I've heard people use the term mishmash, said Edward G. Jefferson, commenting on his corporation's takeover of Conoco back in, Conoco. I keep mispronouncing that. Conoco back in 1981. Well, you know, that's all good sport for the morning paper, but it really doesn't describe this DuPont acquisition of Conoco at all. Whether mishmash or synergism, the marriage of the venerable Lord of Delaware, being DuPont, to a giant wildcatting oil company out of Ponca City, Oklahoma, has left more than a few people wondering about the future of DuPont. Why? Because we know now, after decades of research into the field of organizational development and behavior, that one of the biggest impacts on an organization's ability to survive and thrive is what happens when an organization merges with another organization with disparate or seemingly oppositional cultures. The questions to be faced at the time that DuPont acquired Conoco. What becomes of this at the time, as of 1981, so going on 40 plus years ago, 179-year-old institution that got its start selling black powder to the US government during the War of 1812. And for decades, DuPont grew by the motto, better things for better living through chemistry. That was their mantra, played off their vision, their mission, their core values. All right, so that was historically what they were known for. Can it be that people who brought you nylon, Teflon, lucite are now running the corner gas station? This is kind of language that existed in 1981. To all of his doubters on Wall Street and elsewhere, Mr. Jefferson, chairman of the board at DuPont, said, if you can't see where we're going, it's because you don't know where we've been. Aha. What does that mean? Well, what it means is, at the heart, at the soul of every merger between two entities is a justifiable business rationale. There's a reason why, there's a reason why organizations pursue mergers, right? There's some strategic or tactical advantage to be gained, obviously, or organizations wouldn't go through the significant time, effort, and resource required to pursue a merger. DuPont has changed throughout its history, said Mr. Jefferson, chairman of the board. It started out as an explosives business, matured into a chemical business, and got into plastics, paints, and fibers. If you look back a little bit more than a decade, going back to the 1970s at the time, DuPont set its sights on diversification into electronics, pharmaceuticals. Now we're adding energy through the acquisition of Conoco. It's just another diversification. What we can do, he continued, during this interview is to bring some of the talent of our engineering department and our research labs to the problems and opportunities that exist in the energy field. Aha. Okay, now we're getting into the heart of why. So, this is him speaking. I suspect that my successors in the 1990s, the people who come after this merger or this acquisition of Conoco in 1981, my successors in the 1990s will be very glad that we acquired Conoco. File that away in your gray matter. The excitement with which Mr. Jefferson discussed the Conoco merger infected the entire DuPont company, the city of Wilmington, Delaware as well. So this is kind of what was happening at the time. This was a complex merger. The scale magnitude of the two entities that went through the merger was significant. Significant. So there was a lot of buzz around it. Now I'm going to move to some further analysis. DuPont's 17-year ownership of Conoco was a low-octane investment. So now we're going to fast forward. 17 years from the acquisition back in 1981 to the end of that period of DuPont's history in 1998, and why I say the end of that period of its history. So, going to the Washington Post for this source, Conoco Inc., the giant oil company that until recently was a wholly owned subsidiary of DuPont, blanketed the country with full-page ads back in 1998, celebrating its recent $4.4 billion stock offering. So they were acquired by DuPont for approximately $7.5 billion. And now, all of a sudden, a subsidiary of DuPont, Conoco, started selling its shares to literally separate, legally and from a business perspective, separate from DuPont, the parent company. We're pumped, the ads gushed, showing president of Conoco, Archie Dunham, standing next to a Conoco gas pump. But if DuPont stockholders were to run a similar ad about their experience during their 17 years of ownership of Conoco stock, it would be a lot less upbeat. They may say, we are hosed instead of we're pumped. Because you see, and this is me kind of reading verbatim, let me read this. DuPont's experience with Conoco is a classic example of how even smart companies, and DuPont, throughout its history, going on 200 years, has been nothing if not adaptive, innovative, smart, caring about the culture of its organization. It's a classic example, even, the acquisition of Conoco for $7.5 billion, how smart companies advised by smart people can do what turns out to be incredibly dumb things. Buying Conoco in a seller's market when everyone wanted oil companies, and selling it in a market, 1998, when oil stocks were about as popular as the plague. So remember when I said that DuPont acquired Conoco back in 1981, right? There was something that happened. First of all, DuPont and Conoco realized the efficiency, the financial efficiency of creating double hull vessels, which allowed it to be safe, because a lot of times if the vessel carrying oil smashed on the sides into obstructions like icebergs or rocks or other natural or man-made entities, there was more potential damage on a single hull vessel, potential damage, than a double. So they went and they doubled down because they realized it was 15% more costly to double the hull, and a 75% reduction in risk associated with crashing when you only had a single hull vessel. And the reason I'm saying this was because of Exxon Valdez and that massive impact from an economic, environmental standpoint, and the long-term residual negative reputational branding that hit Exxon because of the Valdez crash. So DuPont, 18 years or 17 years after the acquisition of Conoco in 1981 to when it started just selling off that division in 1998, it did come out ahead in its 17-year investment. And the unloading of Conoco in a series of clever tax ducking transactions maximized the value to DuPont in the long term. More on those kind of shell game, the moving of how it sold Conoco's stock to minimize adverse financial impact or maximize positive impact. But all the financial engineering in the world can't hide the fact, here we go. This is the lesson I want you to take away from today. As far as being a business leader, an owner, and you're considering growth post-COVID through strategic merger and acquisition activity, all the financial engineering in the world can't hide the fact that DuPont would have been a lot better off investing its money in a humble S&P 500 index. Well, why did they acquire Conoco in the first place? Oil, black gold, that is. The reason they acquired oil was it was a critical component, a resource that was required in the supply chain of DuPont, building a lot of, it needed hydrocarbons for a lot of its other disparate product lines. So it was a way to kind of extend vertically across it, vertically up and down the supply chain to get access to natural resources that it then used in the production of its various business units, products and services. But financially speaking, let's just say that 17-year period of DuPont acquiring and owning Conoco was perceived to be a failure from a culture fit perspective. So DuPont paid $7.8 billion for Conoco, became the wholly owned subsidiary back post-merger in 1981. DuPont is going to realize about $18 billion from its investment, the $8.2 billion in tax-free dividends. So there was a lot of financial benefit. But the question that begs asking was, would DuPont and its venerable at the time 179-year history of focus on culture, focus on people building, being risk averse, not pursuing business opportunities that were heavily speculative. They did their due diligence in everything. They were eminently strategic from a culture fit. Then you have the wildcat, the oil barons, the people who went out and drilled, baby drilled. If you went and you pursued 10 drilling projects and you struck gold oil on one of them, that was perceived to be a success. So there was an inherent risk in the business model of oil prospecting. Two entirely different cultures, mindsets. And what happened was, over time, the people at Conoco in the leadership, in the ownership of stock ranks, started to acquire more and more DuPont stock, and they became more active, those Conoco stock owners, on the board at DuPont. And slowly over time, it doesn't happen suddenly, especially for a 179-year-old company, the actual culture of DuPont shifted. It's like turning a battleship. It's almost imperceptible, the changes that happen, the shift in focus on your vision, your mission, your core values, the way you consider people, the way that you train and develop people. DuPont had a storied history for the significant numbers of things they did to develop future leaders. That was part of their culture. And slowly over time, bringing this Conoco, this massive oil company, into the fold, and the shift in stock ownership and the composition of the board led to a shift in mindset. And it happens almost imperceptibly in organizations. And this is what I want you to be wary of. So EI DuPont, the Conoco split off. So I want to go to the Harvard Business School, just a very brief write-up to kind of give you an abstract of it. After taking 30% of its Conoco oil and gas subsidiary public in the largest domestic IPO in U.S. history, management of DuPont is considering divesting its remaining interest in Conoco. That's what was announced in the news recently that caught my attention and said, okay, let me go back and kind of rethink my experience, my 30 years of experience with DuPont. This goal is to be accomplished through a relatively uncommon transaction called the corporate split-off, under which DuPont shareholders will be given the option to exchange their shares of DuPont for shares of Conoco. But in contrast to other spin-off options, Owners of DuPont stock are not obligated to exchange shares. Management's objective in restructuring is to move DuPont away from its traditional energy and chemical business toward life sciences, agriculture, biotech, and pharmaceuticals. So you can see this is kind of wrapping up that 17-year experience that DuPont went through the acquisition and acclimation of Conoco into its corporate business unit fold, and then ultimately realizing strategically it made sense to transition Conoco away. And so these are the things that I like to share with people when it comes to the consideration of culture. So to any family business, to any small business, to any business that's been growing or plans on growing through merger and acquisition, understand that there's very likely a very significantly positive potential impact from an ROI perspective, whether it's the acquisition of another organization's workforce, whether it's their position in an industry or sector that the company that wants to acquire it wants to move into, whether it's the acquisition of a client Rolodex. There's many reasons for organizations to merge. And I'm telling you this, as you as an organization go down this road and you start to consider a merger, you're going to do a lot of due diligence in terms of the valuations of both entities. You're going to look at the operational efficiency. The financials are always front and center. But what often gets overlooked is the people side of both of those organizations. And now, thank goodness, more and more people are starting to drink the Kool-Aid that I've been divvying out for 15 years about the power of culture. The power of culture in terms of all the other components of an organization or two that are merging. I know this firsthand. My last day job, I headed up the marketing for business services at one of the country's largest cable and telecom companies. I was there a year, I grew their revenue 40%. And so big cable company A started talking to big cable company or telecom company B. And pre-merger, the first thing that happens, has always happened, is they look at the financials of both organizations, they look at the organizational structure, and they say redundancy in workforce. I was one of several thousand people on this side who were terminated just to make the numbers look better. And then there were thousands of people on this side. And then you merge, and then you figure out afterwards, okay, we have two separate entities. Now what do we do? That is what we call in the trade ass backwards. So I'm telling you now, if your organization, as I said previously, but it bears repeating, I know I'm repeating myself, there's a reason when organizations as huge as DuPont, with tens of thousands of employees, has been around for hundreds of years, you spend decades building an amazingly positive organizational culture and treatment of employees. The moment you take that step to merge, the first time, or maybe you merge with several organizations and it's death by 1,000 cuts, slowly through lots of mergers or once through a massive merger, the actual post-merged entity doesn't just organically become compatible. I would suggest investing more time, effort, and research into, before you merge, do a workforce audit, a culture vitality audit of both organizations. And when you're comparing notes in terms of the rationale, the business strategy for the merger, what is the organization going to benefit from? Post-merger, a set of considerations in the valuation should be the culture and people side. So that's my clarion song for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed taking a kind of glance back down memory lane of DuPont. I have family members who worked there for decades until they retired. I'm very fond of the organization, but I hope you appreciated this. I took away some nuggets of aha, as maybe you will be in the process of going through a merger to grow. And if you enjoyed this video, all the links to all the resources will be in the description below. Please like it, smash the subscribe button, I benefit when this audience grows, and it gives me an opportunity to reach more people and be an advocate for culture transformation. And please also feel free to share the video with anybody that you think might be interested or could benefit. Thank you so much. Have an amazing rest of the day.